Rent is just throwing money away. If you have spent even a few years as an adult, you have almost certainly heard this sentence repeated so many times that it starts to feel like an unquestionable law of nature. Parents say it when you visit home for the holidays. Real estate agents say it with absolute confidence while showing you properties. Friends who just bought their first house suddenly repeat it like financial wisdom that has been passed down for generations. Even social media reinforces the message with endless posts about building equity and not paying someone else's mortgage. The idea becomes so deeply embedded in our culture that renting starts to feel like a temporary failure, like a stage of life you are supposed to graduate from as quickly as possible. And because of that pressure, millions of people find themselves sitting late at night at their kitchen tables with a laptop open, a spreadsheet half built, and real estate listings covering the screen. They start comparing their rent to potential mortgage payments. They start calculating interest rates and down payments. And eventually, they arrive at the same conclusion that almost everyone arrives at. Our rent right now is $2,200 a month, but this house we found would only cost $2,400 for the mortgage. That's basically the same thing. We might as well just buy. In that moment, the decision feels logical. It feels mature. It feels financially responsible. But hidden inside that simple comparison is a massive mathematical mistake that most people never notice. The mistake is so subtle that it has convinced entire generations that buying a house is automatically the smarter financial move, even when the numbers say the opposite. And that mistake quietly costs people hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of their lives. The problem isn't that buying a home is always bad. The problem is that most people are comparing the wrong numbers. They compare rent to a mortgage payment, when in reality, the mortgage payment is only a small portion of the true cost of owning a home. Because of that flawed comparison, people believe they are making a smart financial decision when they are actually using a completely broken calculator. Once you understand the full equation, you start to see the housing market in a completely different way. And the tool that reveals this hidden reality is something called the 5% rule, a surprisingly simple framework that allows you to estimate the true economic cost of home ownership and compare it honestly with the cost of renting. To understand why this rule exists, we first need to understand a concept that almost never appears in casual financial conversations, even though it is one of the most important ideas in economics. The concept is called unrecoverable costs. An unrecoverable cost is exactly what the name suggests: money that leaves your bank account and never returns. It doesn't increase your net worth, it doesn't build equity, and it doesn't create future wealth. It simply disappears. When you rent an apartment, the idea of unrecoverable costs is extremely easy to see. Every dollar you pay in rent is gone the moment you send it to your landlord. When your lease ends, you walk away with nothing except the experience of having lived there. Because this is so obvious, renting has developed a powerful social stigma around it. People talk about rent as if it is money wasted, money burned, money that could have been building wealth if only it had been spent differently. But this is where the conversation becomes misleading, because the truth is that owning a home also involves enormous unrecoverable costs. The difference is not that homeowners avoid these costs. The difference is that homeowner costs are hidden inside a complicated structure of payments that makes them feel productive, even when they aren't. When renters write a single check labeled rent, it's easy to see the cost. When homeowners write several checks labeled mortgage, taxes, insurance, repairs, and maintenance, the illusion appears that these payments are building wealth. But once you break down the numbers honestly, you realize that a large portion of those payments behave exactly like rent. They disappear permanently and never contribute to your financial future. When economists analyze housing over long periods of time, they consistently find that home ownership has three major categories of unrecoverable costs that exist whether homeowners acknowledge them or not. The first of these costs is property taxes. Property taxes are perhaps the most visible hidden cost of owning a home, yet they are often mentally separated from the price of housing when people compare renting and buying. Every year, homeowners must pay their local government a percentage of their property's value simply for the privilege of owning that land and building. These taxes continue forever, regardless of whether the mortgage is paid off. Importantly, property taxes do not build equity. They do not increase the value of your investment, and they do not come back to you when you sell the home. They function purely as an expense. In fact, if a homeowner stops paying property taxes long enough, the government can legally seize the property, which means homeowners never truly escape this cost, even after the mortgage disappears. Across much of North America, property taxes average roughly 1% of a home's value each year. That means if someone buys a $600,000 house, they can expect to pay around $6,000 annually in property taxes alone. Spread across 12 months, that works out to roughly $500 per month. That $500 does not build wealth. It does not increase net worth. It simply evaporates. The second major unrecoverable cost is maintenance, and this category is where many homeowners unintentionally underestimate the true expense of owning property. Unlike rent or taxes, maintenance costs do not arrive as predictable monthly bills. Instead, they appear unpredictably and often at inconvenient times. Homes are complex physical structures built from materials that slowly wear down. Roofs deteriorate, pipes corrode, electrical systems age, heating and cooling units eventually fail. A homeowner might go several months without spending anything on maintenance, which creates the illusion that maintenance is cheap. But then one day, the roof needs replacing, the water heater bursts, or the foundation requires repair, and suddenly the homeowner is writing a check for thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. Because these expenses occur irregularly, many homeowners fail to include them when comparing housing costs. They focus on the mortgage payment and forget about the long-term reality that houses require constant upkeep to remain livable. When researchers analyze housing data across decades, they find a remarkably consistent pattern. Home maintenance costs average roughly 1% of a home's value per year. That means the same $600,000 house will likely require about $6,000 per year in maintenance over the long run, which again averages about $500 per month. Just like property taxes, this money disappears permanently. It simply keeps the house functioning. However, the third unrecoverable cost is the one that truly transforms the entire conversation about housing, and it is also the cost that almost nobody mentions in everyday discussions about real estate. This cost is known as the cost of capital or opportunity cost. When someone purchases a $600,000 house, they often make a down payment of around 20%, which equals $120,000. Once that money goes into the house, most people stop thinking about it because psychologically it feels like the money is still theirs, just stored inside the property. But from a financial perspective, the critical question is not where the money currently sits. The important question is what that money could have been doing elsewhere. Over the last century, residential real estate in many developed countries has produced inflation-adjusted returns of roughly 1.3% per year. Meanwhile, diversified stock market investments, such as broad index funds, have historically produced inflation-adjusted returns closer to 5% or more per year. The difference between those returns represents the opportunity cost of placing capital into real estate instead of other investments. When you lock $120,000 into a house, you give up the opportunity to invest that money elsewhere, where it might grow faster over time. Even if someone finances a house with a large mortgage and puts down very little cash, the opportunity cost still exists. In that situation, the homeowner is paying interest to the bank instead of losing potential market returns. Mortgage interest rates of 5 to 7% effectively represent the price of borrowing capital to own the house. Economically speaking, both scenarios produce similar outcomes. Money that could have been compounding in investments is instead being consumed by the cost of housing. When economists estimate this cost across long periods of time, they typically calculate the opportunity cost of capital at roughly 3% of the home's value each year. Once you add these three components together, the true cost of home ownership begins to emerge clearly. Property taxes average about 1% of the home's value annually. Maintenance adds another 1%. The opportunity cost of capital contributes roughly 3%. Together, these costs total approximately 5% of the property's value each year. This relationship forms the basis of the 5% rule. The rule provides a simple way to estimate the real economic cost of owning a home by focusing only on the money that disappears forever. Instead of comparing rent to a mortgage payment, which mixes expenses with savings, the rule compares rent to the unrecoverable portion of home ownership. Applying the rule is straightforward. You take the price of the home you're considering, multiply it by 5%, and divide the result by 12 months. The number you get represents the approximate monthly cost of owning that home that behaves exactly like rent. For example, if someone is considering purchasing a $600,000 house, 5% of that value equals $30,000 per year. Dividing that number by 12 months results in a monthly unrecoverable cost of about $2,500. In other words, even though the homeowner might feel like they are building wealth through homeownership, roughly $2,500 per month is effectively disappearing through taxes, maintenance, and the cost of capital. That number becomes the true benchmark for comparing renting and buying. If a comparable property can be rented for less than $2,500 per month, renting is actually the financially superior decision because it allows the renter to avoid those hidden costs and potentially invest the difference elsewhere. To see how powerful this idea can be, imagine two individuals living in the same city with identical incomes and financial habits. Kevin decides to buy a $600,000 home. He puts down $120,000 from his savings and commits to a mortgage payment along with property taxes and insurance that total roughly $3,500 per month. To the outside world, Kevin appears to be making the responsible choice. His coworkers congratulate him, his parents feel proud that he has finally become a homeowner, and culturally, he seems to have achieved an important milestone of adulthood. Sarah, meanwhile, decides to rent a nearly identical house in the same neighborhood for $2,200 per month. Her friends sometimes tell her she is throwing money away, and occasionally her family asks when she plans to buy a place of her own. But Sarah understands the 5% rule. Because the unrecoverable cost of owning Kevin's house is around $2,500 per month, and her rent is lower than that, she realizes she has an opportunity to invest the difference. Instead of putting $120,000 into a down payment, she invests that money into a diversified index fund. In addition, because her monthly housing expense is significantly lower than Kevin's total cost, she invests the difference every month as well. Over time, those investments compound. 20 years later, Kevin owns a house that has appreciated significantly in value, but he has also spent decades paying property taxes, maintaining the home, and servicing the mortgage. Sarah, meanwhile, has built a large investment portfolio that continues to grow and remains completely liquid. The comparison is not meant to prove that renting always beats buying, but rather to demonstrate how different the financial outcome can be when hidden costs are considered. Ultimately, the point of understanding the 5% rule is not to convince everyone to avoid homeownership. Houses provide benefits that spreadsheets cannot easily measure. Homeownership offers stability, emotional comfort, and the ability to customize your living space without worrying about landlords or lease agreements. Many people value the sense of permanence that comes with owning property and building roots in a community. Those factors can make buying a home worthwhile even if it is not the mathematically optimal investment. The important lesson is simply that the cultural narrative around renting and buying is far too simplistic. Renting is not automatically throwing money away, and buying a home is not automatically building wealth. Both options involve costs, risks, and trade-offs. The only way to evaluate the decision intelligently is to compare the correct numbers. Once you stop comparing rent to mortgage payments and start comparing rent to the unrecoverable cost of owning a home, the entire conversation becomes clearer. In many modern housing markets where property prices have risen much faster than rents, renting can actually be the financially smarter choice. In other markets with lower home prices and favorable tax structures, buying may still make sense. The key is understanding the math behind the decision instead of relying on cultural assumptions. When you apply the 5% rule and run the numbers honestly for your own city, you may discover something surprising. The financial answer to renting and buying is often very different from what society has been telling you all along.